In the spring of 1837, somewhere between the Alabama River and a stretch of lowland swamp that never fully dries, a name was removed from a ledger. Not crossed out, not erased, simply left unfinished. Saul. The pen stroke ends there. No last name, no age, no explanation. On that same morning, a bell rang from a small white church whose floorboards were soft with rot and prayer. The congregation stood. A sermon was delivered on obedience. Outside, a woman screamed, once, and then the swamp swallowed the sound. This is not a ghost story. It is worse. Sallie Crane was enslaved on paper, but undocumented in spirit. She existed in whispers, in bruises hidden beneath homespun cloth, in children taught never to speak her name aloud. The official record says she ran away, that she was recovered, that she disappeared again. What the record does not say is why she came back, or what she learned each time she escaped. By the time Sallie Crane vanished for the third and final time, the town of Briar Hollow had already decided something was wrong, not with her, but with the land itself. Crops failed in neat rows. Livestock refused to drink from certain wells. Children woke screaming about him sung backward. And always, beneath these disturbances, there was a story the adults would not finish. They said Sallie Crane didn't just flee bondage. They said she walked into something older, something the church had built itself around. Briar Hollow was not a town you stumbled upon. It was placed deliberately, half a mile from the river, far enough from trade routes to avoid scrutiny, close enough to water to survive. At its center stood the church. Always the church. Built in 1811, before most of the families arrived, the church predated the town's name, its graveyard, even its laws. Slaves were baptized there. Children were disciplined there. Confessions were taken without witnesses. The floor beneath the pulpit had been replaced 3 times. No one ever explained why. Sallie Crane arrived in Briar Hollow as a girl of maybe 12 or 13. Her age was guessed, not recorded. She was given the last name of the man who purchased her, but among the enslaved, she was called Saul Who Listens. She listened to sermons through cracked doors. She listened to crying through the walls beneath the church. She listened when the preacher told certain families to stay behind after service. What she heard did not sound like prayer. In 1824, Sallie escaped for the first time. She followed the river south, barefoot, bleeding, guided only by rumors of free soil. She made it 3 days before dogs found her. When she was dragged back, something had changed. She no longer begged. She no longer cried. Witnesses later said she stared at the church doors as if counting them. That winter, 2 children went missing. The preacher said they had been sent away. Their mothers were told not to ask where. Sallie Crane was watching. Punishment followed escape. It always did. But Sallie Crane was not punished like the others. She was taken into the church basement. There are no official records of what lay beneath that building. Only rumors. Old maps show nothing but soil. But former enslaved people, interviewed decades later, described rooms without windows, walls scratched with prayers in multiple hands, and a smell like wet iron. After 3 days, Sallie emerged. Alive, silent, and changed. She resumed her work. She cooked. She cleaned. She cared for children that were not hers, yet. But at night, she sang softly. Not spirituals. Something older. Something that didn't rise, it pressed down. 6 months later, Sallie escaped again. This time, she went north. And this time, she came back on her own. No dogs. No chains. No overseers. She walked into Briar Hollow at dawn, carrying nothing but a piece of cloth marked with symbols no one recognized. She asked for her children. 2 she had born in secret, baptized without record, hidden in the church's care. She was told they were being prepared. That night, the church bell rang without a hand to pull it. From that point forward, Briar Hollow began to close in on itself. Visitors were discouraged. Sermons grew longer. The preacher began locking the doors during service. Children were separated by age and bloodline. Families were instructed to give certain sons and daughters to the church. Sallie Crane was allowed to move freely. That should have terrified them. Instead, they believed she was contained. They were wrong. Sallie had seen beyond the plantation, beyond the laws, beyond even escape. On her second flight, she had found others, women, runaways, people who remembered things passed down in fragments. They spoke of covenants disguised as scripture, of churches built to hold something beneath them, not above. They told her the land remembers. and that the land can be taught to answer back. Sallie returned not as a slave, but as a witness, and witnesses are dangerous. In 1831, Sallie Crane disappeared for the third time. This time, she took keys. This time, she took names. This time, she took the children. By morning, the church basement was empty. The pulpit had collapsed inward. And beneath Briar Hollow, something that had been fed for decades finally realized it was starving. The bell began ringing before anyone touched it. At first, the townspeople thought it was the wind. Spring storms rolled in thick from the river, shaking the church steeple like a loose tooth. But the ringing did not sway. It did not stagger. It told with intention. One strike every 7 breaths. Inside the church, the preacher knelt alone. The pulpit had collapsed inward during the night, wood bent as if softened by heat or prayer. Beneath it, the floor yawned open, revealing steps that should not have existed. The basement, once sealed, once guarded, was empty. No chains, no mats, no children, only scratches along the stone wall, newly exposed, carved deep enough to split fingernails. Symbols circled each other in uneven spirals, overlapping verses from scripture that had been cut apart and reassembled incorrectly, and written again and again, as if to anchor reality itself, was a single name. Sallie. By midday, the town organized a search. They called it a recovery. Slave patrols moved first, armed with dogs and lanterns, sweeping outward from Briar Hollow in widening circles. But the men were uneasy. They avoided the swamp, avoided the riverbanks, avoided the places Sallie would have known best. Some claimed the dogs refused to track her scent. Others said the ground itself felt wrong, soft in places it should have been firm, warm beneath bare boots despite the cool air. One man swore he heard singing beneath his feet, as if the earth were breathing hymns back at him. By nightfall, the patrols had found signs of passage, broken reeds, footprints that appeared and vanished, scraps of cloth marked with the same symbols seen in the church. But no bodies, no children, and no Sallie Crane. The preacher insisted they expand the search north, away from the river. Sallie, he claimed, feared water. He said it with certainty that did not match the truth. Sallie had been raised by the river. She trusted it. The preacher insisted they expand the search north, away from the river. Sallie, he claimed, feared water. He said it with certainty that did not match the truth. Sallie had been raised by the river. She trusted it, which meant she had gone south. And she had planned it. Days passed, then weeks. The town began to unravel in quieter ways. Children woke screaming, claiming they had been taken underground, led through rooms that smelled of rust and wet stone. They described hands that guided them, not roughly, but firmly, hands that refused to let go when they cried. When asked to describe those hands, every child said the same thing. They were warm, not human warm, earth warm. Some children began refusing church entirely. Others refused to speak at all. One boy carved the spiral symbol into his own arm with a nail, insisting Sallie had shown him how to make the ground listen. The preacher called this hysteria. The mothers called it punishment. The land called it memory. It was an elderly woman who found the first truth. She lived alone at the edge of Briar Hollow, too old to be useful, too forgotten to be watched. One morning, she discovered a bundle on her doorstep, food, cloth, and a folded page torn from the church ledger. On it were names, dozens of them. Children marked as dedicated, families marked as offering, dates that aligned with disappearances no one had ever been allowed to mourn. At the bottom of the page, written in a careful, deliberate hand, was a message. They taught me what they buried. I am returning what they stole. That night, the river rose without rain, and far beyond the reach of Briar Hollow, Sallie Crane was still moving. Through water, through darkness, through a country that did not yet have language for what she had become. The ledger should have stayed buried. Once the names began to circulate, quietly, hand to hand, whispered in kitchens and behind barns, the town lost control of its own story. Mothers recognized handwriting. Fathers recognized dates. Families began to realize their losses were not isolated tragedies, but part of a pattern that stretched back decades. Children had not been sent away. They had been offered. The church elders tried to reclaim the ledger pages, but they moved faster than authority ever could. Each time a page was destroyed, another surfaced, copied, memorized, rewritten. The truth, once loosened, behaved like rot. And always, beneath every revelation, there was Sallie Crane. Her name appeared in the margins of old sermons, in baptismal records where it did not belong, in testimonies that had been crossed out but never fully erased. She had been present longer than anyone remembered, watching, listening, learning how the town fed what lived beneath it. 10 miles south of Briar Hollow stood a structure no map labeled clearly. Locals called it a school. Others called it an orphan house. But the river knew it as a place where children stopped screaming. The building sat on high ground, surrounded by cypress and fog, its windows barred not to keep intruders out, but to keep sound in. Former caretakers, when questioned years later, spoke of nightly rituals disguised as lessons, of hymns sung slowly, rhythmically, until the children's voices weakened. Below the building ran tunnels. Old ones. They did not lead to freedom. They led back. Sallie Crane found this place during her second escape, and she understood immediately what it was for. Sallie did not flee the third time. She executed something closer to a return. She knew the paths the church used. She knew the times the children were moved. She knew which doors were never locked because no one believed they needed to be. When Sallie left Briar Hollow for the final time, she carried more than children. She carried instructions. She taught the children how to listen to the ground, how to feel when the land resisted, how to recognize places that consumed memory and places that preserved it. She taught them songs that were not prayers, but keys. The church had fed something beneath itself for generations. Sallie intended to starve it. By late summer, Briar Hollow was unrecognizable. Neighbors accused neighbors. Families fled at night. The preacher locked himself inside the church, refusing to leave the pulpit that now leaned forward as if bowing or collapsing. The ground beneath the church began to sink. Not violently, not suddenly, slowly, as if whatever lived there was weakening, as if it were dying. And dying things do not go quietly. When the church finally began to sink, it did not fall forward or backward. It folded inward. Floorboards bowed like ribs under pressure. Pew legs snapped not from force, but from absence, as if the ground beneath them had simply decided not to exist anymore. Those who watched from a distance said the church looked less like it was collapsing and more like it was being swallowed by something that had grown tired of holding it up. What lay beneath was not a basement. It was a chamber, stone-lined, hand-carved, older than the town, older than the language carved into its walls. Symbols overlapped in layers, some Christian, some not, some so worn they resembled scars rather than writing. At the center of the chamber was a pit, not deep, not wide, just large enough to receive. Long before Briar Hollow had a name, the first settlers discovered something about the land. It consumed. Children went missing. Livestock vanished. Entire camps dissolved overnight, leaving behind no sign of struggle, only disturbed soil and silence. The settlers, desperate and uneducated in fear, did what people have always done when confronted with something they cannot destroy. They negotiated. The church was built not to worship God, but to mask a transaction. Offerings were made. Not weekly, not publicly, quietly, selectively. Children without strong family ties. Children who would not be missed loudly enough to attract attention. The church called it stewardship. The land called it feeding. And it worked. The town prospered. Until Sallie Crane learned the truth. Sallie was never meant to survive the basement. Most who entered it did not come out whole. But Sallie listened. She learned the rhythms. She recognized that what lived beneath the church did not hunger endlessly. It hungered specifically. It remembered patterns. And it could be confused. On her second escape, Sallie found stories older than the church's lies. Accounts of places where land and memory intersected, where songs could disrupt agreements forged in blood and silence. She returned not because she was obedient. She returned because she understood leverage. By removing the children, Sallie did not break the bargain. She violated it. The land beneath Briar Hollow began to fail. Wells dried. Crops twisted. The pit beneath the church cracked along its edges, seeping a smell like damp iron and old breath. The preacher, alone in the sinking church, realized too late that Sallie Crane had not escaped the system. She had reprogrammed it. And now, the thing beneath the church was no longer being fed. It was waking up. The final night came without storm or warning. No thunder, no wind, only a silence so complete it felt deliberate. Those who remained in Briar Hollow later said they realized something was wrong when they stopped dreaming. Not nightmares, all dreams. Sleep became a blankness, heavy and resistant, as if the mind itself were being held underwater. At midnight, the church bell rang once, then cracked. The sound did not echo outward. It collapsed inward, swallowed by the ground beneath the steeple. Those who ran toward the church found the doors open, the interior empty, and the pit beneath the pulpit exposed fully for the first time. But the pit was no longer waiting. It was closing. Stone ground against stone. Symbols split apart. The chamber convulsed like a lung expelling its last breath. And from deep below came a sound no one could later describe the same way. Some called it a groan, others a hymn, others the sound of soil remembering it had once been alive. By dawn, the church was gone. Not ruined. Gone. They found her footprints at the edge of the swamp. Bare. Calm. Facing south. No signs of struggle followed them. No blood. No drag marks. Just a deliberate path into the water, where reeds bent aside as if allowing passage. Some claimed Sallie Crane drowned, but the river never returned her. Others believed she crossed into free land under cover of night, disappearing into communities that would never write her name down again. That she lived. That she aged. That she watched from afar as the town she broke slowly dissolved. But a few, those who had listened carefully, understood something else. They said Sallie did not leave. They said she stayed with the land. The children were never recovered. Not officially. But decades later, communities far from Briar Hollow spoke of arrivals. Groups of children appearing together, self-sufficient, carrying no documents, but sharing songs no one recognized. They knew how to read the ground. They avoided certain places instinctively. They never entered churches built on old foundations. When asked where they came from, they gave the same answer. From where the ground stopped taking. They carried no fear of the past, because someone had carried it for them. Briar Hollow does not exist on modern maps. The land where it stood is uneven, resistant to building. Surveyors report instruments malfunctioning. Crops fail without explanation. And sometimes, only sometimes, workers swear they hear singing beneath the soil, slow and steady, like a lullaby meant for something that will never wake again. No marker bears Sallie Crane's name. No grave holds her body. But the land remembers her. Because she listened when others refused to hear. Because she returned when escape was not enough. Because she did not destroy what was hidden. She ended its hunger. And in doing so, Sallie Crane became something the institution could never reclaim. Not a ghost. Not a legend. But a boundary. A warning written into the ground itself.